Hey guys, it's Luke Yon, and today I am going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of January. I read 10 books in January, which I'm pretty happy with, considering I've been super busy with college applications and school in general. I had my midterms. In January, I was finishing up all of my applications for the January 15th deadline. I was hearing back from some schools, so it was just kind of a stressful, busy, hectic month altogether. So I'm definitely happy with the amount of books that I read, and yeah, let's just get into the video. So the first book that I read in January, my first book of the new year, was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This is the first book in a YA urban fantasy series that follows a main character named Bree, and at the beginning of the story we find out that her mother has died in a car accident and that she and her friend Alice are going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for their, an early college program. It's a 2-year program. And while there, Bree ends up getting in trouble for something that happens in the first chapter, and she ends up running into, or meeting, a boy named Nick, who's a part of the Legendborn Society, and as Bree kind of becomes more involved with the Legendborn Society, she learns more about them and how they are all descendants of King Arthur in the Knights of the Round Table, and she kind of learns more about each of the people there, about the different types of magic, and also begins to unravel some of the mysteries surrounding her mother's death. So I really enjoyed this book. It was a great book to start the year off with. Finally, I did not rate my first book of the year 3 stars. I've been, for the past years, always rating the first book that I read 3 stars, but I ended up rating this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It dealt with, a lot of things that I love in books in general. So it had a college setting, which I always love. It had secret societies, it was Arthurian legend, so it was kind of just a lot of things that I really like, all in one book, so it felt like a recipe for success. And it definitely was, for the most part. I loved Bree as a main character. She's one of my favorite characters that I've read in a really long time. She's so layered, and especially for a debut novel, I was really impressed with how Tracy Deonn was able to build her as a protagonist. I thought she was really great. I loved her internal conflict where she kind of views herself as there's a before Bree, before her mother's death, and after Bree, after her mother's death. And I just love the way that she deals with everything. I love the way that she interacts with other people. Her relationship with her dad is really sweet. Her relationship with Alice, and obviously Nick, and all the other people in this book I really enjoyed. The other characters were a little bit weaker. I did really love Alice and her father and Nick, and there's a woman that she ends up working with. But there were some characters, in the Legendborn Society that felt a little bit flat to me. I feel like part of that is just because they didn't have a ton of, page time, and also because we are limited strictly to Bree's first-person point of view. So things kind of get a little bit, murky in terms of, people that she doesn't interact with a ton. So I feel like they're gonna get more development in the sequel and in the subsequent books in the series, but that was one of my complaints about the story. I do think that the magic system was really cool. I loved the blend of Arthurian magic and also elemental stuff. I thought that was really interesting. I did have a tough time understanding it all, but Tracy Deonn does a great job of explaining it. It's really detailed. There's a lot that goes into the magic system and the world building. I haven't fully grasped it yet, but I'm sure as the series continues, I definitely will start to understand things a little bit more and wrap my head around it all. The plot was really interesting. It was a little bit slow, and I do think that this book could have been shorter, but I loved it in general, and I really liked how it blended history and talking about generational trauma and uncovering things about the South, because obviously UNC is in North Carolina, it's in the South, all of that. So overall, I thought this was a great debut, a great series starter, and I'm super excited to continue on with the series. Next, I read The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. This is the sequel to The Bear and the Nightingale. It's the second book in the Winter Night trilogy, and this series follows a main character named Vasilisa, who have been told stories from Slavic folklore all her life, and as she kind of grows older, we see her grow a lot in the first book. She starts out very young, and then she kind of becomes a teenager and a young adult. She kind of realizes that there's more to these stories and they might not be all fiction. I definitely did enjoy this book. I didn't love it as much as the first book, The Bear and the Nightingale. I loved that book. This one was good. I still give it 3 stars, like 3.5, 3.75, but there was just something about it that felt very, like, slow to me. Like, I really liked part 1 where we are focusing more on, like, her brother and sister and how they're dealing with the aftermaths of book 1. We don't really get to see Vasilisa a ton in the first part of the book, and then in part 2, we follow her, again, in the aftermath of the end of book 1, and then part 3, they kind of all meet up again, and part 3 is the longest section in the book, and to me, the most boring. There were just a lot of things that, like, dragged on for a really long time. The chapters were really long, the scenes were really long, and I felt like there wasn't a ton of forward momentum, which was kind of annoying. It felt like wading through mud a lot of the time, but part 4 was, like, really action-packed and plot-heavy, which I really enjoyed. It kind of brought everything together for, like, a really cool ending, which I'm sure will lead into a great third book and finale. But this book was definitely slower, more political. There was definitely some more magic and romance in this book, but I just feel like overall it was a little bit weaker than the first book, but I am still really excited for the third and final book. Next, I read Cursed by Marissa Meyer. This is the sequel to Gilded, which is a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin and follows a main character named Serilda, who lives in this world that is inspired by German folklore, and she, we find out, has been cursed by the god of lies and god of stories. And one day she ends up telling a story about being able to spin straw into gold, and the king, the wicked Earl King, takes her to her palace and throws her in the dungeon and asks her to spin straw into gold, and if she can't, he will, like, kill her for telling falsehoods. And while she is in the dungeon, she meets a poltergeist named Gild who offers to spin the straw into gold for her in exchange for, you know, a series of things. I'm sure you can kind of guess where the story goes if you know the original Rumpelstiltskin tale, but that book kind of deals more with the, like, original story, and this one picks up, obviously, where that book left off, and this is a duology, so this is the final book in the series. And it kind of wraps everything up. This one is definitely deviates from the original story a lot. The first book adheres to it pretty well, but this one definitely goes and, like, it tells its own story. So I really enjoy this series. It's very, very dark. It's almost like grimdark, and you can kind of feel it when you're reading. Marissa Meyer does a great job of, like, putting you in that mindset. You kind of feel like there's this cloud over you whenever you're reading. Like, no matter what type of scene it is, it always just feels, like, pretty dark when you're reading it, so you definitely have to be in, like, the right mood and mindset to read this series, but I really enjoy it. I think the mythology is really cool because it's all German folklore, and obviously it's a very, like, dark, interesting world. I do wish there was a glossary in the back, because I feel like it would have just helped things kind of feel a little bit more, like, it would have, like, helped me stay, like, not confused all the time. That was not eloquently stated, but I think you get what I mean. And yeah, I feel like this story was really interesting. I definitely didn't feel like it was as repetitive or as slow as the first book. I feel like the first book definitely was way too long. I think this one was a little bit long, but it wasn't too, like, it didn't feel as long as the first book did. And this is actually a little bit shorter, but it has a lot more plot, and the plot was way more interesting, I think, just because it was less predictable, because it doesn't follow a story that we already know. It's kind of Marissa Meyer's own take on, like, what happens at the end and all of that. There's a lot of mysteries revealed, or there's a lot of answers revealed in this book to, like, mysteries that have been woven throughout the entire series, which I really liked. I do think that the characters in this series are a little bit flat, compared to Marissa Meyer's other series, like Lunar Chronicles, and even, like, Heartless, which is a standalone, and Renegades. I just feel like Serilda could sometimes be a little bit watered down at times, and I didn't love her as like, I felt for her, obviously, but it just felt hard to, like, see her as a real person at times. I do think that there are some, like, threads that weren't exactly, like, tied together by the end of this book, which I didn't love, but I loved the epilogue, and I think the plot itself was really interesting, and I do like the series overall. After that, I picked up Lost in the Moment and Found by Seanan McGuire. I listened to the audiobook for this. This is the 8th book, I believe, in the Wayward Children series. I read one of these books every January, and I always enjoy doing it. I never really expect to love them, which is why I am more shocked than anyone that I ended up rating this book 5 out of 5 stars. Oh, also, I should mention, I rated Cursed 4 out of 5 stars, by the way. I did like it more than the first book, so yeah. But anyway, back to Lost in the Moment and Found. I was so shocked that I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars because I've rated the other books consistently 3, at most 4 stars. But this book follows a main character named Antoinette who ends up running away from her home because of a issue that she's dealing with. There's a lot of gaslighting that she faces at home, and she kind of happens upon this world. It's really hard to describe these books because anything you say could be a spoiler just because they're so short. They're obviously novellas, so there isn't a ton to say without getting into spoiler territory. But I will just say I loved this book so much. I think the themes in it were so amazing. I loved the messages. I loved Antoinette as a main character. I really appreciate that Shauna Maguire didn't try to do what she often does with this series, which is tell a giant epic fantasy story in only 150 to 200 pages. I feel like the scope of the story was great for the length that this book was. There wasn't this big evil. There wasn't something that they were trying to defeat. There wasn't this gigantic plot that felt like it was crammed into a really short book. It was a very quiet, theme-dense story, which I really enjoyed, and I think the messages of this book are great. There is a content warning, so I would definitely read that before going into the story and considering it. But yeah, I really love this book. It's hard to say too much, again, without giving stuff away, but I will just say that it is definitely going to be on my favorite books of the year list. Okay, if the angle changed, I'm sorry about that, but I had to move my camera because it was way too high up, so I was standing on my tiptoes to feel like I was in frame. But anyway, the next book that I read in January was another 5-star book. I've never had this many 5-star books in 1 month. And that was Beasts of Prey by Ayana Gray. This is a book that I've kind of had my eye on for a really long time since it came out, but I never actually owned a copy, so I asked for a copy for Christmas and I got it. If you want to watch my Christmas book haul, I'll link it in the description box below. But I ended up loving this book. It follows 2 main characters. We have Econ and Kofi. I don't even know how I'm going to describe this book. Basically, Kofi works in a night zoo, which is kind of, I read it as an allegory or a metaphor for slavery and indentured servitude. And she works there with her mother, and they take care of all the animals that are there for this man that owns the zoo. And Econ is kind of a soldier, a warrior in training. It's really difficult to describe it. Basically, they end up meeting and they have a shared desire to find this mythical creature called the Shaitani, and they have their own motivations for getting it and all of this stuff, and they end up going on this journey through this magical jungle to try to find this magical creature. And I loved this book so much. There were so many aspects of the story that I just fell in love with. I loved the world so much. There were so many metaphors in this story, which I loved reading about. Obviously, there's some more obvious ones with the night zoo, but there's just so many ones that kind of uncover themselves as you get through the story, and especially once you read the author's note, which is at the end of the book, which I really enjoyed reading. And the characters are so well developed. I love both Kofi and Econ, and even though this is told in third person, you feel like you're with the characters. You can empathize with them so well. Empathize/sympathize, depending on the situations. I don't know about you, but I have never been chased by a giant creature in the jungle. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll relate to those parts in the book a little bit more. But I just love these characters, and the plot was so interesting. There was never a dull moment. In the first bit of this book, we kind of see them apart in their own worlds, and then when they meet up, and then the rest of the book is them together in the jungle. And there's also interlude chapters from an unknown, from a character that seems very mysterious, but then you learn more about them. You learn more about the mythical creatures. I loved the world in this book so much. It's one of my new favorite fantasy worlds, and I cannot wait to read the sequel of this book, and eventually the 3rd book whenever that comes out. And oh my god, I just loved it. And the writing was so amazing. It was so perfect. It was never too dense, but it was also really descriptive and flowery, which is perfect for me. And there were even so many similes and metaphors throughout this book that were related to animals, which I loved. Ayana Gray really kept with the animal theme. She would describe people as like having features that like resembled certain animals, or like if they were running, it'd be like they ran like a cheetah or something. I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but like you can, if you kind of try to look for it as you read the book, you'll definitely find a ton of those. And yeah, I just loved it. I thought it was so adventurous. This is like a perfect fantasy novel in my opinion, because I love the quest adventure aspect, I love the jungle, I love the world. It was perfect, and I would so recommend it if you haven't read it yet. This book does not get enough love. Then I did my annual reread of the Truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. So I read Truly Devious, The Vanishing Stair, and The Hand on the Wall. I'm just going to hold Truly Devious while I describe this series, and you've been on my channel, I'm sure you know what it's about. But it follows a main character named Stevie Bell, who ends up going to this school called Ellingham Academy, which is a school that is free, and you can basically go there if you are any type of prodigy. So there are people that are really good at math, or that are engineers, or build video games, or are artists, or are writers, and Stevie Bell is going there because she is a detective, and her mission while at Ellingham is to solve a cold case that took place at Ellingham in 1936 when the founder, Albert Ellingham, who was this tycoon, one day his wife and daughter end up being kidnapped. A few days later his wife's body is discovered, but his daughter is never seen again, and the only clue is a riddle which kind of describes the possible ways of murder, and it is signed by someone named Truly Devious, and the case went unsolved, and it is Stevie's like life goal to figure out who committed this murder, because there was also another murder that happened at the same time to a student at Ellingham, and she kind of is trying to unravel this mystery, and while she's doing so, one of her classmates in the present shows up dead, or ends up dead, is found dead, and so she is trying to catch a killer in the past while avoiding a killer in the present. I love this series so much. It is literally like one of my top 3 or top 5 or top 3 like favorite series of all time. I love it so much. I will never stop rereading it. I'll reread it every single year because I just love it so much. It takes place in Vermont. I love the vibes. I love Ellingham. Truly Devious is like an amazing starter book. I could probably tell you the exact plot of this book verbatim. I won't, but I like every time I actually listen to the audiobook for these books a lot. I did read them physically as well, but I listened to the audiobook a lot just because I was kind of getting ready for midterms and all that stuff, but I loved it so much, and every time a new chapter would start, I'd be like, oh, this is the chapter where this happens, and it was just like, every time I reread this series, I catch new things, and Truly Devious, I feel like, is a great starter book. I absolutely love it. The Vanishing Stair is probably my favorite book in the series. Again, there's so many, like, aspects of this book that I just love. I feel like the plot is perfect, the pacing is amazing, the way that the past and present intersect, and the reveals that are in this book are some of my favorite. And then The Hand on the Wall is probably my least favorite of the 3, but I still love it so much. It's still absolutely a 5 out of 5 star. I love the way that things all sort of come together. There's a lot of sections in the past in this book that I really enjoyed. It's kind of like 2 separate journeys that are happening side by side in this book, and then obviously all of the reveals at the end are great, and I just feel like it wraps up the series so well. So yeah, definitely a series that I will recommend till the day I die, and will reread till the end of eternity. I also reread those in part because I wanted to get to the new book in the series, which is 9 Liars by Maureen Johnson. This is one of the standalone books that follows Stevie Bell, but that does not deal with the original Ellingham case. So this is a new case, and this follows Stevie as she is in it's kind of like the fall of her senior year. She doesn't really know what to do. She's kind of lost. All of her friends are busy filling out college applications, which I really related to, and she just feels kind of like she has no path to walk on. And she's feeling kind of bored because she's already solved 2 great mysteries, well, kind of 3 amazing mysteries, well, honestly 4, like, it's hard to count all of them, but she solved a bunch of mysteries at this point, a couple of mysteries, and she's just feeling a little bit bored, so she gets a call one day from her boyfriend David, who's studying abroad in London, and he offers for her and her friends to take like a week abroad and meet up with him. They get permission from the school, from Ellingham, and they end up going to London, and while there, Stevie finds out about another cold case that happened in the 1990s, where these 9 friends ended up going to this country house that one of them owned. They played a game of hide and seek, and 2 of them ended up dead, and the 7 kind of remain somewhat friends to this day, but there's all this stuff happening, and once again, as Stevie is trying to figure out what happened in the past, some new mystery presents itself in the present, and she's kind of trying to deal with both at the same time. This is the 3rd book that I gave 5 out of 5 stars this month. Obviously, I gave, like, the 3 truly Devious books 5 out of 5 stars, but this is the 3rd, like, book that I read for the first time that I rated 5 out of 5 stars. Again, that's never happened to me before, but I loved this book so much. I loved seeing Ellingham again in the first couple of chapters. I loved reading about London and all of the history, because one of the 9, like, is what they call themselves. She is like a history nut, and we kind of learn a little bit more about her because her niece, Izzy, is a friend of David, and she kind of is the one to introduce this case to Stevie when she arrives in England. And I just loved the story. I loved the mystery. It was so fun to read. I read it so fast just because I needed to know what would happen. And again, I just love the characters. There's a lot of, like, relationship drama and just, like relationship, both romantic and friendship, that is dealt with in this book that I loved reading about. It was like equal parts character and plot driven, which I loved because I love these characters. And I thought the plot was really interesting. So yeah, I loved this book, loved the mystery, loved the writing, the setting, everything about it. It was amazing. And then the final book that I read in January was Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. This is the 2nd book in the Alex Stern series. It's the sequel to Ninth House. And obviously it follows a main character named Alex Stern. It takes place at Yale and deals with kind of the secret societies of it, and the occult magic that they do. It's kind of hard to describe this series, especially since I haven't read the first book in a pretty long time, but this book obviously picks up where the last one left off on a great cliffhanger. And I enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do think that my expectations were a little bit, like, too high when I went into this book, and I feel like it was definitely very slow. I feel like my thoughts are kind of jumbled, but I feel like one of my main complaints with this series is that I just feel very at arm's length with it. I don't know if it's the writing or the characters themselves, but I just feel like the characters are not as well-rounded, well-developed, as three-dimensional as the characters in Leigh Bardugo's other series, like Six of Crows, and even, like, King of Scars, like that series. And I don't think it's, like, the third-person narration necessarily, because both of those series are told in third person, but I feel like it could be, like, maybe if this was told from Alex's first-person point of view, it could be a little bit different, and then when we jumped into other characters' heads, it could be third person. I don't really know what the solution would be, but I just feel like at times I'm, like, not in the story. I'm kind of, like, watching it from afar. But I did like all the kind of mythology in this book. I liked the overall trajectory of the plot. I just feel like it was kind of, like surrounded by things that weren't as interesting. And kind of like with The Girl in the Tower, it felt a little bit like I was wading through mud a lot of the time, just because there would be things that are happening that I wasn't too interested in. There would be side plots. And then one of my, like, biggest complaints about this book, which you can read about in my Goodreads review in, like, the spoiler section if you're interested, once we get to, like, the crux of the book, like, the halfway point, the thing that we've been building up to, we're kind of only there for, like, a little while. Like, that is only dealt with for a little while, and then we kind of go back, and it's like, what was the point of that? And then it kind of happens again in the end of the book, and I just felt like this whole book was for nothing, just because I felt like there were only 3 things that really happened in it, and it was like, we built up so much stuff only for it to not really be that big of a deal, and I just feel like we ended up, at the end of this book, right back where we started, even though there's, like, one other aspect. I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe without getting too spoilery, because this is a sequel, and obviously I can't, like, spoil the end of the second book in the series, so it's a little bit difficult to describe. I kind of wish I'd done a reading vlog for this book, but maybe when the third book comes out, I will do, like, a rereading vlog of the first and second books, 9000 Hellbent, so that I can kind of, like, formulate my thoughts a little bit more. I don't know, I just feel a little bit like I have very mixed feelings about this book, because the things that I enjoyed, I really enjoyed, I loved, but the things that I didn't like so much, like, weigh down the book a lot and kind of, like, make my rating go down. So yeah, overall, it was a pretty solid book. I definitely like Lee Verdugo, but I think I just have to like accept that while the series is good and while I enjoy reading it, it's never going to be like a favorite of mine. But that is it for this video. I'm sorry that the lighting has changed dramatically. I'm going to try to like fix some of it in editing, but I'm filming this. I usually don't film after I come home from school, but I did do that today, just because I was gonna film it yesterday, but I was like dealing with stuff and it was just like a hectic couple of weeks. So I filmed it after school and now it's like getting dark out. But anyway, that is it for this video. I would love to know what you guys thought about the books that I read this month, if you've read them, or just your thoughts in general. I'd love to know what books you read in January as well, and yeah, that is about it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. All of my social media links are in the description box below, and I will see you soon for a new video. Bye!